I wanted to ask you, I am a great fan of Larry McMurtry's novels, but also a book of essays he wrote called Essays on a Narrow Grave about Texas, where 30 years ago he explored the cowboy myth. And I thought this was an amazing extension of it. In fact, he's even been quoted as saying, "I wish I had written this story." And he did the next best thing. Talk about your first encounter with the material yourself, the first encounter with the story.
Well, I read the story about 4 or 5 years ago. It was at the Good Machine. James Shemus, my creative partner, showed me the material. He said something quite special. I don't know if you're going to make it or anybody could make it, but it's been around and take a look. I got choked up when I read the short story. And I didn't really know why. I think it's a mixture of that Larry McMurtry world and a romantic love story that intrigues me. It's unfamiliar, but something very basic. It's a movie about love, about illusion of love. That's what Brokeback Mountain is to me. It's poignant because our guys miss the romance when they actually understand it, gets it. They missed it. And then I went ahead to do the Hulk. I was set to do that. But this 30 pages refused to leave my mind. And I was happy to find out it's still available after I did the Hulk. And then at that time, James Shemus already sit on the other side of the table. He's the head of Focus Features. So he greenlit the picture. We get the money, get the rights. And Annie Proulx showed me around in Wyoming, and I work with Larry and Diana Osana on the script. And in the meantime, Larry was very educational for me. The book you've mentioned was a great help, and he ran through all that whole Western thing, realistic Western thing for me. Well, how the myth of the cowboy world, how the business happened and gone away, why it makes sense in the first place, it didn't make sense by the turn of the century, and where that the elegiac mood come from, the Western literature, because the whole Western was gone and replaced by cattle instead of buffaloes and all that. When the truck comes, there's a whole thing. It's a whole lot of history to fill me in. And I made a pre-Western called Ride with the Devil. The last shot is Western, and now I'm making a post-Western. So Larry's education sort of filled me in the Western part of it, that 50 years of history. It's a group of guys and helped me understand before how the Western style, how people are mixed up in the frontier, but in Missouri-Kansas border, and right now become that center of America. How that prevail, how people move to the West when they didn't entangle in a relationship, they didn't know what to do anymore. They move out to the West, and shooting location, boys actually with guns on horseback, dealing with animal, muds, landscape. I think that was good experience to warm up for this one. That helped me understand the West. Actually, that was the Midwest a little bit, and this is a different story. This is also very male-oriented, male friendship, affection-oriented movie. They're both realistic, which is somewhat different from Western genre that the Hollywood created. I think that feels the most the same. It's what my eyes see, what I read. It's somewhat different from the movies. I think that feels very much the same. That very help how I decide to make choices in this movie.
I wanted to ask you one thing. Jake Gyllenhaal was quoted some places saying that he feels his Jack Twist character was essentially a straight guy who fell in love with a man. And I haven't talked to Heath Ledger yet, but what's your feeling about that in terms of the motivation of these two characters? Because it's 1963. I was 19 at the time. I can identify everything every stage of their lives they go through. I was going through it at exactly the same time. Part of it in Texas too. Who do you think these guys are? Could they be considered gay in any real sense, either one of them, or is it just one of these cases where two people could fall in love?
Well, in the short story, it was a mystery, and so is the script. But as filmmakers, I think we have to decide what we're going to use. To me, they're both gay. That's in the back of my head, especially Jake's character. Actors, usually I don't bother what they use from themselves, because he's straight, he wants to use that part of himself, that's his privacy. I just need him to deliver believable performances. In my head, Jack, the character Jack, is more of a dreamer, romantic, and also knowingly gay. You can trace it in the scene by scene. I mean, he seems to know in the very beginning, and he's still pursuing the bar dangerously outside of Ennis, possibility of Ennis, and failed. You can see him how he faked through the marriages, but also functional as a husband and a father. And when things gets really bad, he goes to Mexico, and everything indicates he's very gay. He just have to deal with the environment, and he's very knowingly more smart and knowing than Heath's character. And Ennis, on the other hand, I think sexually he can be aroused. He's not as obvious if you have a degree in terms of being gay, but he can certainly be aroused. Otherwise, he wouldn't be hooked up for 20 years. He wouldn't be needing him. He wouldn't be smile when he sees 4 years later when he sees Jack show up by his doorsteps and embrace and kissing him. So he definitely can be excited. But because his sexuality is so twisted, because the childhood abusive experience, and also I reckon by the time he coming of age, aware of sexuality in his teenage years, his parents died. So it's very negative. The whole sex thing was very negative for him. So he's a more twisted character, have a lot of self-loathe, self-denial. That's just, he lived with that. He's more complicated character. And he's also more macho, conservative, very Wyoming way, because that's the only way he knows how to live his life. I think those are the characters for me. And Jake believing as long as it delivers and it's truthful for him, and as long as it's convincing on screen, I'm fine.
Did you talk to one of those other characters?
Oh yeah, but I didn't talk about how they're gonna use their life experience transform into performance. That's that's their job, and I respect that. I don't need people. I don't need to go through a psychotherapy session to get to the performance. They deliver, and I request what I need. We talk about what the movie's about, what their sexuality is like, what no. But they use their own stuff. He's free to use anything that's real to him, but that's actor's procedure.
When we first see the two of them together, Jake, who I've seen in more films, I'm trying to catch up with some of Heath's films. Jake has the barest trace of a grin, and he's clearly in the moment, looking at Heath's character, at Ennis, and he checks him out through the rearview mirror, which of course is your setup. But there's that very slight trace of a grin. It's a signature kind of thing. It doesn't get in the way. It's not intrusive, but it's a Paul Newman-like thing. When Newman announces himself in HUD, you get exactly where he is right out of the box. And I think with Jake's character, you do the same thing. Talk a little bit about that, how you receive, how you must see these things as they come along.
It's interesting you mentioned Newman, and there's also Montgomery Clift. They show the tender side of the West. In the same time, they play macho roles. So Jake sort of carried that tradition for me. For me, the anchorman for the movie when it comes to Western is really Heath that carries that brooding Western mood, masculine. And Jake, however, is carried more of the movie genre of a romantic love story. So I think he provides that tender, that sweetness, the dreamy quality. I mean, he is pretty classy. I mean, he carries that tradition. Yes.
I wanted to ask, in terms of, in the book, there's a certain amount of sexuality. In the script, there's more. And I think you brought more to it in terms of the romantic side. Talk about that kissing sequence, because I think it's really wonderful, and a lot of the fans of the movie will really love that. Talk about how the different erotic things in the movie developed and where they come from.
Oh, when it comes to love-making scenes, I think it's important they're convincing, and I will do, in my judgment, no more, no less what the movie needs. How they scripted and how they booked it is a different story because that's indirect media. A movie, what you see is what you get, pretty much. I think for the guys hooked onto each other for 20 years, some excitement and clash to the audience is needed. The first thing I go with confusion. They don't quite know what happened. They go with their animal instincts and their existence, their confusion, there's violence, and there's excitement. And they both deny it. And then after they deny it, they can go ahead and go with tenderness. So the kissing scene in the second one, I go with tenderness and sexiness. I think Jake, with his shirt off, only shirt off, is very sexy, and that's for me is commitment. That's different from the short story. That's additional scenes. And then there's a third kissing scene is firmly convinced that they're lovers. It's 4 years later when they see each other, they just embrace and kiss like the oldest couple. Everything happens so naturally, and they live to find each other so naturally, so quickly, and there's no denial that they're in love. So those are the three functionals, and I they're functional. They're stimulees to the love story.
How many shots did you have to make with some of those scenes?
Oh, a scene like that, usually I go with very simple. Like the first 10 scene, there was only one shot. The whole scene is one take. The shot was complicated. It's handheld, dimly lit, and the actors carry the scene. There's no cut, no coverage. So it has to be perfect. We did 13 takes. I end up using take number 7. And the second scene, there was like 3 shots, pretty standard. Wider shot and 2 close up for their faces. That's for intimacy. And the third scene, when they kiss at the staircase, that was 2 shots, also handheld, 1 on each side. Yeah.
How much time did you actually spend in Alberta, up in the Brokeback Mountain section? Because that's the loveliest part of the film, and you've even been quoted as saying there's the heaven of Brokeback Mountain, and there's the awfulness of life in the actual little country towns. How much time did it take to shoot that part of the movie?
I don't quite remember how much time I spent on the mountains. 2-3 weeks maybe. It was pretty short. I would say roughly like 3 weeks altogether. Different parts of the mountain. Sometimes we just turn around so the mountain look different, but we're in the same area. Especially the shots with the sheep. When they camp out, we go around the mountains and find different campsites. But when we're with sheep, it's better we don't move a whole lot because it's very slow moving those sheep.
How did you do the aging, which is exclusive, especially with
Well, makeup, hair, subtle makeup, and lighting, costumes, but that's less than half of the job. The most job has to be carried by actors who went through a lot. I know that's the hardest thing because for making the movie, because it's short epic story. It's short. It's right in very terse form. It's an accumulation of slices of life, but at the end, it wants you to feel 20 years in epic, and also because the landscape is epic. So just do the aging right by slice of life is hardest thing to do. We did quite a bit of camera test. So every 4 or 5 years, we did a look, hair, makeup, and the recession of the hairlines. We do different camera tests, and we stay there and take photos. So we do like charts accordingly. We're shooting out of order, But each time we go into age, I will double check the aging is right, and the actors they do a little exercise before they go into it. So I'll remind them again what age range they're in.
There's some ambiguity. It's not obviously that Jack dies and Ennis is left alone. But what does Ennis come away with thinking has happened based on his own feelings? Does he think that Jack was killed?
Yeah, I think so, because just way he was brought up, he naturally his head go that way, his imagination go that way, and also helped by the way the wife performance, Anne Hathaway's performance. Obviously, she's not telling the truth. It's not what she's saying. So the tire iron was very logic kind of way to go. In the short story, he was very sure. By the time when he talked to Jack's father, he was sure it was a tire iron, not a blow-up tire. But I couldn't put it in, just too awkward for a scene, for the cinematic flow. So I leave that out. I think you can reckon he's dying for something like that. The point is that when Ennis finally admitted his love, he missed it. That's just tragic and poignant.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about two other films. One, The Ice Storm. I think The Ice Storm is when I became convinced you were really an American director. You know, wherever you have been born, you were an American director. You got this classic Watergate-era New York suburban train culture story dead-on accurate. And Tobey Maguire's character, there's a part of me I see in there on the screen. I've never seen myself in a movie except in two movies he's played in, the other one being Wonder Boys. And astonishing, that's an astonishing film. Talk a little bit about how you get into the emotional side of it. It's different than the novel. I've tried to read the novel at times. It's quite different than the novel. Talk a little bit about how you approach that.
The material I got in making The Ice Storm has twofolds. One is from the novel, which is not adapted quite loyally. I think the novel, the writer is more angry than I am. I'm not angry with that era. I think the author is less forgiving, and I didn't really have that. And also, a lot of textures were from James Schamus, the producer-writer. And he too see himself as that Toby's character. So he put a lot of his experience in. And also the people who helped me make the movie, the crew, not so much the actors. The actors who play, the parents were too old at that time for the young boys, for the children. And the kids had no idea about the 70s. They're born after that. So the crew was great help. They grew up like yourself, roughly my age, and was the children's age in 73. But when we make the movie, they were the parents. So altogether, I was very helped by the filmmakers. That was the first movie I deliberately have to treat the movie as art, but not my own statement. The movies I did before that, even including Sense Sensibility, I was very familiar with the materials. First three, I wrote them myself. The Sense Sensibility is just something I was familiar with that I did in English in Major League. So that was the challenge, the cultural barrier. But with the Ice Storm, I was kind of scared of the material because it's challenging. The more I get into it, the more I felt I was walking the minefield for America. That's the year seems like the Americans want to forget. That was very scary. So I was more taking a step back and treat it more like an art with a distance. And artistically speaking, I think that's more successful. I think it's more provocative than being a statement. I mean, being a provocation to people who lived through that era.
One thing that I noticed, because I spent my life on those commuter trains, the self-dramatizing conductor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This train culminating in New York's Grand Central Station is now back in service. And that's a device to show us the flashback, which the whole movie is. Canaan, Connecticut. That you have to have witnessed that's the way conductors in New York do. I mean, it's like all of that stuff is amazing. It's exactly right, and it works dramatically, structurally in the film, because the whole film is a flashback, and we realize that when we see the conductor the second time. Talk a little bit about how that comes in.
Well, I took the same plane, same train commuting, which is funny. It's kind of scary. It's like iffy. Yeah, I took the same train, same train line. I live in the suburb of New York. I live in Larchmont, so that's Stanford line. Yeah. I live in Mamaroneck. My boys go to Mamaroneck High School. Yeah. Yeah, I was familiar with that train line, and yeah, a lot of research, people's help, and how I figured it out that also helped too. I think the flashback was tricky, but it's also beautiful because in reading the book, only at the end you realize it's the author's, the Tobey Maguire's character is the author. It's through his flashback, so we kept that circling structure for the movie. I think that the movie benefit a lot from that. It get a lot of emotional quality from at the end because of that.
One more question I want to ask you about Wedding Banquet. You've been quoted as saying that you became disillusioned with your father's nationalist politics background in Taiwan. The character in Wedding Banquet's father is from that background. And it makes more sense to me. Talk a little bit about what it was that disillusioned you about Taiwan that made you come to America and really become an American filmmaker. And I mean that in the most complimentary sense. And we think of Taiwan in much more favorable terms with respect to the mainland, but obviously there was something that was quite different.
Well, I didn't come to America because of disillusion of Taiwan. I come in as a young boy. Not so young. I was 23. I come here to study like everybody else after college and military service. All boys has to do that before they come out. We come here to study. It's the study here, and also the beginning of reading communist books, which I wasn't allowed to read back in Taiwan back then. That caused the disillusion, and also it's liberating to get in touch with Western drama. That's liberating. So the two put together, that caused the disillusion. It's part of my growth. Yeah, and that affect my creativity in making movies in a big way. That help. It makes me watch the world from a kind of a low angle. And outsiders, yeah.
Your preoccupation at times with two great gay films, your attraction to gay material.
I don't know. They're good story. One I made up, the other I inherited from Annie Proulx. I think the unusual angle to examine into humanity, it's a fresh way to examine into something very fundamental to our existence, whether it's about ourselves or our relationships. I think it helped distill the material, whether it's family, filial piety, or love, romantic love, and how much we fall for it, how much we resist it. I think it's just a great way to get into it. But the bottom line is I got attracted to it. I don't know why I got so attracted. I like to keep that a mystery. Yeah.